God created the universe in 7 days. But in school, I just learned about the Big Bang. The Bible said God made Adam and Eve. But I had just gone to the Boston Museum of Science and seen fossils and learned about evolution. And so I asked my priest how I should reconcile these inconsistencies. Essentially, I asked my priest, which story is true? This particular priest replied, "Nice boys don't ask that question." So I was kind of annoyed, and I was confused. I didn't know which way to turn. Where science offered me exciting proofs of its claims, photos, equations, visible evidence, religion was much more demanding. It wanted me to accept everything on faith. And faith, I found, was a difficult proposition in an imperfect world. So in high school and college, I gravitated to the solid foundations of science. But over the years, as my studies in science continued, I discovered that the further one progressed into the solid foundations of science, the softer the ground started to get. I'm sure those of you who've studied science have had this experience. When science starts tackling the tough questions, it starts using phrases like uncertainty principle, margin for error, theory of relativity. Slowly, physics turns into metaphysics, numbers become imaginary numbers, and even matter itself comes into question. And I should mention that subatomic particle physicists now believe that matter, everything around us, is nothing but trapped energy. That, for example, this podium is nothing but energy trapped in the shape of a podium. Or that every one of us in this room is nothing but pure energy manifesting itself in the shape of a human being. Now, these same physicists who proclaim that everything around us is energy are now quietly asking themselves if it is merely coincidence that the vast majority of ancient religious texts, including the Bible, describe God as energy and describe God as being all around us. We live in a very exciting era. Right now, for the first time in history, the line between science and religion is starting to blur. Physicists exploring the subatomic level are suddenly witnessing an interconnectivity of all things, and they are having religious experiences. Buddhist monks are reading physics books and learning about experiments that confirm what they have believed in their hearts for centuries, but have been unable to quantify. What I finally come to accept is that science and religion are partners. They are simply two different languages attempting to tell the same story. Both are manifestations of man's quest to understand the divine. Science dwells on the answers, while religion savors the questions. Thousands of years ago, mankind had an extensive pantheon of gods and goddesses to explain everything that was beyond our understanding. Earthquakes, infertility, thunder, even love. The ebb and flow of the ocean was attributed to the shifting moods of Poseidon. Infertility was caused by falling out of favor with the goddess Juno. And pandemic disease was a punishment, a plague sent by an angry god. This kind of spirituality is known as the God of the gaps. That is, when the ancients experienced gaps in their understanding of the world around them, they filled those gaps with God. Over time, however, the progress of science began removing the gaps. The pantheon of gods started to shrink. For example, we now understand the science of thunder and lightning, and Thor has been banished as a foolish myth of an ignorant time. We no longer turn to God for answers as to why the skies drop hail or why plagues spread. Science has answered those questions. We now turn to God for the answers to a handful of questions that science has never been able to answer. Where did we come from? Why are we here? And what happens when we die? And in asking these questions, we realize that we, just like the ancients, we still worship the God of the gaps. We still call upon God to fill the gaps in our modern understanding of the world around us and of the human experience. Every day we have a greater scientific understanding of the world, and it becomes more difficult to accept ancient beliefs blindly without questioning, even if we desperately want to. How do we read the story of Adam and Eve in the face of evolutionary science? How do we read the book of Genesis alongside with a cosmology textbook? How do we become modern, science-minded people without losing our faith? Ideas like these have always been exciting to me, and about a decade ago, I explored some of them in a novel I wrote called The Da Vinci Code, El Código da Vinci. In that novel, fictional characters debated a very simple question. What would it mean for Christianity if Christ were not literally the Son of God? If he were less up there and more down here, more like us? Not everyone thought that was a good question to be asking. About a year after the Da Vinci Code came out, a priest walked up to me on the streets of Boston, and he yelled and he said, "Mr. Brown, I did not like your book one bit." I didn't know how to respond, but before I could, the priest broke into a big smile, and he added, "But I just had to come over here and thank you." He went on to say, "Every Wednesday night for the past 10 years, I've held Bible study. And every Wednesday night, the same 8 people come to my Bible study. This week, I said I was going to talk about the Da Vinci Code. And we had hundreds of people show up for Bible study." Apparently they had to move out into the sanctuary to have room for everybody. He said, "I've been trying to get people interested in this topic my entire life. Talking about your novel isn't how I imagined it would happen, but I want to thank you that the dialogue is finally happening." I believe it is our duty as reflective people to spark dialogue. And this is one of the primary reasons I write novels. Writing, however, can be an isolating pursuit. It's challenging and sometimes very lonely. It can be a strange way to spend your life. I'm guessing we probably have a lot of writers here tonight. I can't actually see you, but I'm assuming you look sad and lonely and desolate, depressed. On the process of writing, George Orwell said, "Writing a book